What's up, guys? So today I'm finally doing the video about Rotos that I promised like a couple weeks ago. And as you probably know, Rotos is one of the most popular champions in current arena meta. And he has basically always been top tier arena champion since his release. And he's very popular both in offense and defense. It is kind of funny actually, considering that he's the most nerfed champion ever in the history of the game. Many people know that Rotos has been nerfed 2 times, but actually he's been nerfed 4 times, and 2 of them were kind of indirect nerfs, but they were specifically targeted at Rotos. And because of that, it is kind of surprising that he's still one of the top arena champions. And what makes him so good in arena is that, first of all, he has the damage to finish the fights, even in the current arena meta where you can't really use like buff strip and decrease defense like people used to do in past. And because of his multiple extra turns and his RNG mechanics and his high damage and like tankiness, like basically he has everything that you would want from arena champion. But all of that makes him very good in arena defense and makes him kind of unreliable matchup, and unless you are able to counter him very strongly, there is always a small chance that he might win. Or even if you can counter him well, there might still be tiny chance that some of those teams might still be able to beat you. But if we quickly take a look at his kits, basically his A1 has a chance to do decreased defense debuff and 25% extra chance of granting a turn. And this doesn't hit incredibly hard. The damage wise it's just a normal decent A1 for a nuke champion. But the fact that it has a chance to grant extra turns, it adds a lot of RNG elements to the arena, which makes him a very annoying matchup to deal with. And he might always pop off and finish the fight in a 1 turn. But you don't really want to get any accuracy on him, especially in the current arena meta. Like, there is a chance that he might cheap himself, so actually the first part of this kit isn't very good at all. And other interesting part about this skill and all of his other skills is that he scales from both attack and HP, and this actually makes him very different to gear than any other champion in the game. And it is actually very big benefit for him because it adds a lot of options and it makes a lot of gear that otherwise wouldn't be top tier, be like top tier on him. But then if we look at his A2, it steals 20% of enemy max HP, and this skill only has 2 turn cooldown when it's spooked, which is very low cooldown, especially considering that both his A1, A3 and passive all grant him extra turns. This skill hits very hard, but unless you have decreased defense on enemy, his A3 still hits harder. But in that case, this actually is his hardest hitting skill. But the good part about this skill is that every time he does it, and it is very low cooldown, he increases his both tankiness and damage. And over time, because of this skill, you will basically win the fight. And basically, when you steal 60k HP from the enemy, which is where it's capped at that point his A3 will block revive on enemy. And this skill ignores 60% of target's defense and unkillable and block damage buffs, so something like swift parry, for example. But when you're able to stack the A2 enough in the fight, eventually this skill will block revive, and this skill hits very hard, like as you will see later in this video. Like, my Rotos is gonna hit like 130 to 200k with this skill, but basically it one-shots anything unless they have a lot of buffs on them. And this skill is only 3 turn cooldown, which is kind of low cooldown on a skill like this. And then his passive makes it so that you can't reduce his HP more than 50% per like 1 hit, so basically he can't be one-shotted. But of course skills that do multiple different hits can one-shot him still. And this skill actually used to be way better. This is one of the 4 nerfs that was targeted at him. I think it was probably the latest one. Yeah, it was the latest one out of all of the nerfs. But back in the day, actually people used to build their Rotoses low HP on purpose, because this skill like worked really well with shields. And basically, if your Rotos had 20k max HP and you had a 40k shield, so like 60k effective HP in total, he could only take 10k damage because of this passive. And this was so OP that they changed the way it works, so that if he hits more than 50% of the damage and he has a shield, then it will just ignore the shield and this skill won't proc at all, and he won't get extra turn and he will take way more damage than 50%. And this definitely deserved to get nerfed back then, because that was totally OP. And of course, that was long before Bolster set was released, so if Bolster set existed back then, he probably would have gotten nerfed much earlier. But because back in those days everybody was always using buff strip, it wasn't as big issue as it is nowadays. But the first nerf that he actually got wasn't to any of his skills, but it was to his interaction with Relentless set. And basically, in the past, you could proc both Relentless set and his A1 at the same time, so you could get 2 different extra turns from the same skill. And they made it so that only one of them can proc. And also they made it so that every time you proc an extra turn, then the next time the chance to proc another extra turn in row is reduced by 50% every time, so that you won't get infinite amount of extra turns. But actually the third nerf that Rotos got, which is the least known of these nerfs, because it was basically a third nerf, but back in those days, ally attack could proc Rotos A1 as well, and you could get extra turns from those. And when Necret was released, there was this weird interaction that if you had Necret with refresh accessories, and he procced them with his A2, which would always grant him an extra turn if he doesn't kill his target, meaning he could basically do multiple A2s in the row. And all of those ally attacks with Necret and Rotos could potentially proc extra turns for Rotos, so it was possible to get infinite amount of extra turns on Rotos. Now that didn't happen very often, but if you had Necret in those days, you definitely encountered this thing, and many times I had 3+ extra turns for Rotos in row. But yeah, basically the Relentless set was the first nerf that Rotos got, and then the latest nerf was to his passive. And the second nerf that Rotos got was actually basically reducing the multipliers on all of his skills, and it took the block revive away from his A3. It used to instantly block revive, and now you need to stack the A2. And then the third nerf was the nerf to his passive. And even in current arena meta, you see him a lot both in offense and defense. And kind of the reasons why he is so good, I kind of mentioned them already, that he is very tanky and he hits hard. He definitely has some issues with him as well, that he only does single target damage, which is why he wasn't as popular before Blessings, because it was faster to buff strip enemy and then do decreased defense and just AoE nuke them. But nowadays it's a lot harder to kill defense teams, and he is actually perfectly suited in the current meta. So here is my Rotos build, and this is kind of interesting topic to talk about, because basically you will want to build him very differently than any other champion in the game. And a good rule of thumb is that on Rotos, as you can see on this very basic damage calculations, we are calculating the damage scaling that he has for both attack in the first picture, and the second one is for HP. on his A3, which is his most important and highest damage skill. But basically, as you can see from this, 100 attack is equal to 1.1k HP, which is a good rule of thumb to like keep in mind. But basically this makes it so that he scales very well from both attack and HP. And the short version is that on like percentage attack or HP, attack is better, and then on flat attack or HP, the flat stat is better. So for instance, on ring and banner, HP 1 is better than attack. Now, if you have better substats, and maybe in future better ascension, either one can be better, and later in this video I will show you a damage calculation tool that you can use on Rotos. But basically both of these are options, like flat attack and flat HP, but in theory flat HP is better on rings and banners. And it is the same for ascension, of course, that flat HP is the best one that you can get on Rotos. But still, on like percentage substats on bottom pieces, the percentage attack is the best, except on gloves you want crit damage. But both crit damage, attack and HP are all very good, and just getting any of them is a huge deal. And there is definitely argument to make that HP, even though the like percentage HP ascension might add more like actual damage to Rotos than attack, though it isn't a lot less, like it is less, but it is comparable. But it also adds tankiness, and back in the day people used to build Rotos' very low HP on purpose because of his OP passive, and like I explained before, his passive works differently nowadays, and if he has very big shield, basically his passive won't proc. So actually nowadays you kind of want to build a lot of HP on Rotos, not just because for damage, but so that he survives his popular counters like Basileus or Ronda, who both do multi-hits that ignore defense and shields, and they can even kill him through Necret. But yeah, basically, as you can see from my builds, there is kind of like all of those different stats. Like, even this weapon might not look incredibly good, because it doesn't have attack substat, but this is all about trying to fit the best pieces together and get the best possible optimal build. And actually for me it makes sense to use like weapon with HP substat, because it fits the other pieces and this is the overall best build. Even these gloves might kind of seem weird, because let me actually show you. Like, so as you can see, if we look at the gloves that I have, there is actually multiple or two ones that have crit damage ascension, but it turns out that the one with the attack ascension is the best one in damage for Rotos, and that is because he scales so well from HP, and this flat HP substat that might seem very bad in general actually scales incredibly well on Rotos, especially when you can gloop it. Like, ideally it wouldn't have any rolls on it and they would be on the other stats, but this is still incredibly good, and even the flat HP, it is almost as good as percentage attack. And another thing to note about the Rotos build is that on the accessories I will definitely try to use refresh, revenge and reaction if you have them. All of them are very good, like it kind of depends which ones you have the best, and I have kind of this weird thing that this is definitely not the best crit damage amulet that I have, but I'm actually using it to get a little bit of resistance on my Rotos, so that he doesn't always get stunned by enemy Taras. And there is actually a few different interesting interactions on Rotos. But first of all, I will say that definitely you don't want to build any accuracy on him, so that you don't proc any sheeps. And resistance might sometimes be good, especially against Taras, because Taras' passive makes him do his A2 every time Mariska is hit, and Rotos' passive makes him get extra turn every time he takes 50% of his HP as a damage. And so when you hit Marichka, then Taras will hit Rotos and proc his passive, and then Rotos will get extra turn. Now the Taras A2 also stuns the enemy, but if you either resist or have immunity or Sifi on your team, you can basically abuse the Taras A2 and get extra turns in exchange for HP on Rotos. And also lastly, I would say that on Rotos, especially if you use him in defense, but I would say that nowadays both offense and defense, you don't want to build him super slow, like the faster the better. My Rotos is actually slower than the builds generally in top Platinum. Like many people would even use speed boots on Rotos, because if they have +4 Rotos, which I don't, but those builds, they basically can one-shot anything unless they have like lots of buffs like ally protection or something. But in general, they will one-shot with the A3 anyway, so they rather go for more speed so that they have more A2s and more A3s and like they will end the fight faster. And then another thing that I can actually show you is that I have this damage calculation tool provided by my clanmate Stealth, and this is actually posted in the official raid Discord in the arena channel on a pinned post. But this tool has many different things like damage calculations and basically different tools for arena. But one of the tools it has is a damage calculation tool for Rotos, because he kind of scales weirdly from both attack and HP. So recently I saw somebody posting in my clan Discord that this raid content creator called Big Papa Drock, he made a video saying that he has the best Rotos in the game. And he has fairly good Rotos, but I thought that this would be interesting showcase to show the damage calculation and we can see the actual damage. And basically in his video he made the claim that he has the best Rotos in the world. And this is kind of interesting comparison because his Rotos happens to be the exact same speed as my Rotos. And of course his Rotos is +4, mine is +2. And he has 6-star blessing and I have 5-star. But we can actually take a look on this damage calculator and we can easily compare these different builds. And basically we can see that my Rotos does slightly more damage with his A1 and his does slightly more damage with his A2 and A3. But basically it is very comparable builds. And definitely his build isn't the best Rotos in the world, though it is fairly good. But I have never farmed Fire Knight, I haven't bought Cruel sets or Savage sets, so some people definitely have way better build than I do, like, and they have it at +4 as well. But this is just an easy tool to check this kind of stuff and you can easily find out how it works in practice. Now let's also quickly take a look at the blessings and masteries. Now I have made another video about nuker blessings for arena before, but basically the short version is that the most damage overall is actually Phantom Touch, and this is kind of funny considering that it was recently nerfed, but it is still the overall most pure damage if that is the only thing you care about. Now the second option is Lightning Cage, and even at 1 star it has a very good effect that you have a chance to protect buffs that you have. And basically if you protect immunity buff, then enemy can't put any debuffs on you. But of course buff strippers like Kaimar and Serris aren't as popular in current arena meta, so this isn't completely necessary, though it does have very good effects. But this is basically one of the 3 options and maybe the best one at 1 star. But the one that I use and most of the arena players use nowadays is Ward of the Fallen. And basically the reason people use this mastery is that because Rotos scales with HP, this is kind of comparable to the ones that give you 500 attack and 1k HP. Basically those will give you slightly more damage, but it's not very big difference. But this blessing, especially if you have it at 6 star, when it adds 90% damage reduction for the first hit you take, it's a very good counter against Ronda and Basileus, that are the most common counters for Rotos in top tier arena. And the reason why they are so good against Rotos is that, as you can see, they both basically have the same skill, that you ignore shield and defense and then some other effects depending on the champion. And both of these are multi-hitters and can easily kill Rotos even through Necret. Now, if you build the Rotos like I do, and especially if you have the 6 star blessing, which I don't have yet, actually you can't one-shot him anymore. But of course, maybe if you have one Basileus and one Baron, and the Rotos doesn't get any heals in between, then you can basically two-shot Rotos. But it is something important to note that is very relevant in arena defense if you use Rotos. So let's take a look what you can do with Rotos in arena. And here is actually interesting matchup that we can maybe do, is that Warlord locks out enemy cooldowns, as everybody knows. And basically all of the top meta nukers that you see in defense have a good matchup against Baron, because you basically need that to be a good defense nuker. And champions like, I don't know, Rotos, Mortu, Candy, Taras, all of these can fight against enemy teams even if they're locked out. And Rotos can do it because he has very low cooldowns and he procs a lot of extra turns. So let's see how this fight goes. Now, Leorius is kind of bad matchup for Rotos, but nowadays, because Ramantu is kind of inconsistent to use, you don't really see a lot of Leorius in offense, and I'm not too worried about this. But back in the day, when Ramantu was very popular, this would kind of be 50-50 fight. It could go either way depending on the RNG. But nowadays, a team like this has no chance against this team. And yeah, as you can see in this team, this is just a very tanky team, and Rotos has very big shields and is very tanky, and he's just over time eventually gonna get his cooldowns back and finish the fight. Now, this isn't really top arena team, though this would have been top offense team maybe like last summer, but nowadays this is kind of outdated offense team. Basically, what I'm using here is more like what you will see in offense, and no, I'm sorry. Basically, what I'm using here is something that you would use in defense, and what he is using is an offense team. So it is kind of the other way around than it is in this video. Let's see what other teams we could fight. Yeah, this Taras team is maybe a good example. This is very top tier defense team right now. I'm actually struggling a lot against these teams, because I don't really have like lockout or some of the other options that people use to deal with Taras. If I had lockout, I would definitely just run lockout Shamael Rotos Axe, and it would work really well. But for now, I'm kind of struggling against these, but Rotos still kind of can cheese against them. Like, if you either had Siphi or Lockout, Rotos does have a good matchup against Taras, because he gets those extra turns when he hits him with his A2, like I mentioned. But let's see how this fight goes. Basically, in general, if the enemy team isn't built very like tanky, Rotos can basically one-shot anything with his A3. But the issue is that if like the champions are actually built very tanky, and the enemy Maritzka does his strengthen, then it is actually kind of hard to one-shot targets with Rotos, but this team doesn't look very tanky build, so maybe I can one-shot them, we will see. Yeah, this isn't exactly like a top-tier team, so... But it kind of depends what you're fighting against, like, you need to compare against your, like, level. And of course, my team is, like, a bit more geared than this team. Like, this team is basically very good team, and it would beat me if it was, like, as good geared. Because I wouldn't have the damage to one-shot his Nekret, Siphi or Maritzka if they had better gear. But basically, now if I kill the Maritzka, the Taras is gonna one-shot my Rotos. But this will actually work out in this team because we have Lydia. But I'm not even sure if I can one-shot this Maritzka, we will see. Probably I can, because I don't think this team has the best gear in the game, but it will be kind of close, yeah. So, if the Rotos had more HP, he would just get 3 extra turn there. But he didn't, so it didn't work out as well. But if you had Siphi and Rotos, you can kind of abuse the Taras A2, as I mentioned. But yeah, in the current meta, like, this enemy team has tons of buffs and is very tanky overall. And not many champions can deal with this kind of stuff without, like, stripping the enemy team or using decreased defense. And that's why you mostly see champions like Rotos or Baron or Georgit in the current meta. But yeah, I mean, I think this should give you a decent impression how it works. I mean, I'm sure nobody is, like, surprised that Rotos does very high damage and can kill targets even without, like, buff strip and decreased defense. Let's see if there's... Maybe I will... Yeah. I'm always low on games lately. And I kind of... I've been wasting a lot of games to, like, trying to find ways to counter Taras and Maritzka in Arena. Which I haven't really found any good ways. But I need to start wasting... Like, I need to stop wasting games and start saving them again. I was actually gonna use the other team, but... Let's show my defense team. I mean, I change defense teams a lot, and sometimes I use the same team for a few weeks, and sometimes I change it more often. But this is a defense team that I have used many times in the past, and this is very popular offense team. So let's see how they play out. But I will not, like, control the fight, I will just let AI play it out this time. If you were controlling it yourself, of course, you will target the enemy Nekret and kill him first so that you lose the ally protection on the other targets. But the AI is not gonna do that, so let's just let it play out how it does. Kind of unlucky there because my UDK has 3 reaction and it didn't proc, so he kind of should have survived that took and stalled a bit more time, but this happens. Probably, or like definitely, this team won't be 100% win rate either way. Both sides can win, and for defense team, that is really like, that's all you can ask. Like, it is very hard to win fights in defense, and generally you can't do that unless you massively outgear enemy or have new champions that are overpowered. But Rotos is one of those champions that he's just always very good for defense because of his passive and his extra turn mechanics and his block revive. He's basically the perfect champion for arena defense because he adds so much RNG. Now, right now, Taras is kind of better Nuker in defense, strictly because he's just so strong, like he hits harder and he's tankier and so on. But Rotos mechanics are very OP, so probably over time, maybe if there comes new mechanics that counter Taras, or maybe Taras gets nerfed, then probably Rotos might even go above Taras at some point, we will see. Like, they both definitely have their different perks, so they will probably both always be top tier nukers in defense. So here we have a fight against Cupido's team, and these used to be very popular in defense back in the day. Like, back in the day, I mean like after last summer, like between like let's say last summer and last fall, Cupido's teams were the most popular defense teams in top arena. But after Baron got buffed, it became a lot less good, because Baron can one-shot Cupido's even through like all of the shields and damage mitigation and so on. But these are still very good in offense though. But yeah, you used to see a lot of them, and at that time, before Blessings, people couldn't really deal with these teams, and a lot of people were having very hard time attacking them. Basically kind of same as it is right now with Taras and Mariska, that most people can't hit them, and those teams or players with those champions do very well. And I was actually using this weird team that used to be my defense team back in those days. I was actually using this in offense as well, and there were so many Cupido's teams that I was able to abuse this a lot and hit teams that gave me tons of points that nobody else was hitting. And because of that, I was able to get my first red avatar, and like my first, I think it was two, yeah, I think it was my first 2 top 3 finishes. So that was a very long video. I tried to cover everything, but I probably forgot something anyway. If there is anything else, then just ask me in the comments and I will definitely reply. But anyways, thanks a lot for watching and see you next time.